Second part is going to be smart contract, security, and privacy. So we're going to deep digger in these subjects. So yeah, blockchain can certainly play a big role in the development of many industries, but it's clearly not a solution to all our problems. Let's look at the consent example. So I came across a few dating apps such as Legal, Fling, and Lolly that use blockchain technology to document the consent, like Alison already mentioned. So what do you think about technology being used in such a way?
Do you mean like technology encouraging consent?
No, so these apps, they use blockchain to document the consent. So for example, I'll give you a scenario how this works. So you would
Yeah.
open the app, you would find a match, and you would have to agree to what is actually going to happen between two of you in bed and outside of bed, because many things can fall under consent regardless of where they take place and to what extent they stretch. So they would have to document it in app before they meet and then go on a date, and essentially no matter what happens, their consent has been already permanently
Ugh,
documented
I
in a
hate
block.
that. I hate that so much. Who created that? Did a dude make this? Did a man make that? A man made this app,
Uh,
didn't he? That makes no sense. I'm sorry. You cannot, consent is an ongoing conversation, okay? Just like ethics, it's an ongoing conversation. There's no way, let me tell you, I can see a dude, I've met a man online. Okay, I'll give you an example. I went on a date, I met this guy online. This was a while ago, and he was like the perfect type. Okay, I mean, he was like 6'4", he was blonde, like just gorgeous, just like, I mean, like a Chris Hemsworth clone. Okay, so we go on this date. I'm like, when I'm seeing him online and we're talking in digital space, it was all great, perfect, the way it should have went, right? And then we met in person, and it wasn't. We didn't have chemistry. You know, he was very sweet. He was nice, but it wasn't maybe what I would have consented to seeing his Instagram or talk he did. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm consenting to this and that and that. But then when I get there in person, maybe that's not how I feel. Maybe it's an in-person conversation. Maybe it's, maybe I'm in bed. Maybe I'm in bed, like Amber Rose said, butt naked. And then I decide I don't want to do that anymore. So what are the legal implications behind this app? You know, what if at that moment I change my mind? So how are we creating technology that does not just, it's not an end all be all, but creating ongoing consent, ongoing conversation, ongoing communication. It's not a stop and an end. And so and apps like that kind of make me laugh, because civilians are like, oh yeah, that's great. But I'm like, that's literally kind of what sex work is. You know, sex work is you going on to, adult work. I know y'all are in England, so like adult work or Cherry Girls or one of those sites, and going, I like her. I want to have a pre-negotiated conversation about what I want. Maybe I'm not going to, we're on YouTube, so I keep it real cute. Maybe I want X, Y, and Z. I've had this conversation with her. You go on a date, and then that's done because you're navigating it with a professional, someone who is a performer of that app. I think in civilian life, there's no way in hell you should have an app that stamps what you're willing to do before you meet a person, or even after you've met a person, to talk about a sexual act in the future. And the reason why I keep saying things like, did a man create that, did a man create that? I really I don't mean to upset anyone, but I just mean, we can see, I've been blessed enough to be around so many women who create technology. I'm honestly a little bit privileged in that sense. My technological world has been shaped by women. And I can fundamentally see the difference of how women navigate technology and how men navigate technology, the type of technology, sex tech that women create versus the sex tech men create. Men often create tech that wants to replace, and this is not speaking for everyone, but wants to create the human experience or somehow bypass a basic human experience, as in talking about sex. Don't bypass that step. It should be awkward. It should be messy. It should make your heart race. It should make the hair on the ends of your head stand up. Because that's life, baby. That's the human experience. So I don't think I don't like this app, but that's just me. That's just me.
Yeah, I'm also not fond of apps like this. It actually reminds me of there's a Black Mirror episode. I can't remember the title of it, but it's about like a dating app.
Yeah.
And when they meet up, they have a consent meter of what you consent to sexually. And when I watched that episode, I thought, like, my first thought is like, consent can always be revoked. It's not a matter of software. And, you know, tech isn't the solution to everything, but for some reason in our world today, we think that it can solve all of our problems. But in actuality, it has actually exacerbated a lot of inequalities and further marginalized people who are already vulnerable. And so when I look at things like this, like legal fling, I'm familiar with legal fling, but I'm not familiar with lolly. But yeah, I know that these legal fling was created by I think one or two men, and it's just like, okay, well, what's the real issue that you're trying to solve here? It's not consent. You're just trying to get consent so that in the case of an accusation, you have a defense, right? But in reality, the root of the problem that we're trying to solve is that we don't have comprehensive sex education that teaches what the definition of consent means. And so if you don't know how to communicate and you don't know how to talk about consent, and you're going to end up using an app like this, then you know what your essential motives actually are.
That is so true. How can fluid process communication between two people can be turned into a smart contract? In general, how can it be turned into contracts? That's something that technology clearly will not be able to answer. So yeah, I'm wondering what my next question is. What power does the verbal no has over a smart contract? So let's imagine a situation where, for example, a couple met on one of these apps. And so they met, they registered their sexual consent, they went on a date, and before intercourse, one of participants decided that they no longer want to engage in the activity. So the phone wasn't there to revoke a consent, because that's the feature that both apps offer, that you can revoke consent by a tap. So yeah, phone wasn't there, they couldn't revoke a consent, and one of the persons got involved into the unwanted sexual activity. So that person later used the app to revoke the consent, essentially saying that assault happened during the date. So when that happened, the new hash has been put on a blockchain, but the original was still there, saying that consent happened earlier, before the second one was placed. So how in this situation can victim claim for justice? Yeah, like what is the power of verbal no over the technology?
Ooh, can I start?
Yes, sure.
Immediately when I think about this app, within 5 minutes of me, I am a cis Black woman, okay? As soon as I hear this app, I go, why it doesn't work for me? And the second thing I think about is, what if instead of saying, for example, okay, gosh, I'm nervous because this is a public video, but let's just say, okay, kissing, let's just use 3 steps, right? So kissing, like making out, cuddling, and then humping, okay? So let's say on the app, I say, yeah, I want to hump. How about instead of saying, clicking off that, like, yeah, I'm totally going to hump you later, how about just saying, I'm open to it. Let's talk about it. So clicking off the things that you're open to talking about it so that it's an in-person discussion. I think it's so dangerous to treat people and their sexual experiences like a menu that you can order off of. I think that's so harmful, because one of the things it does is that, sexuality is the fundamental thing of how we communicate and navigate our lives. And so we learned this very, 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 very early on. And concepts like shame and love and excitement and acknowledgement all kind of centers around our sexuality at a very young age. So when you kind of create these apps, my fear is that if you're unable to communicate and talk about sex, then maybe it's going to overlap into other things you're unable to communicate and talk about as well. And that an app and technology does not enhance the human experience, so why is it created? If it does not enhance your actual life, then why is it created? Why is it that going on an application and checking a box is better and benefits you more than actually talking to a person you're about to engage in human sexuality with, right? Like, think about it, right? So we have to take a few steps back to understand why Oh my God, I don't know who is in the pink robot with the with the light pink, but I see you, and I like you because you like a lot of the things I've been saying, but I'm not in the VR space, so I can't see, but shout out to you. Why is it that is easier? And it goes back to what Allison was saying earlier. Why is that an easier concept for you to understand going to technology versus the person? A lack of education, fundamentally. Yeah, but that's what I think. And in that kind of situation, I think it's already, I feel like the reason it was created was so that these men could have a reason to assault. And I know that sounds quite negative, but in my mind, I can't imagine any situation. Like it seems like almost a weapon to be used against women. And this is when I go back to who created this and who thought of this and whose problem is this solving? Because I don't think it's solving the issues of the people who in society are already the most oppressed and the most oppressed around the sexuality. I don't think it's that person. I think it's the other. And this is when we start talking about tech philosophy and the psychology behind how we implement it. I can't tell you how to code shit, but I can tell you how people will feel about user technology, which at the end of the day is the reason why it's created. So, we have to understand our value that we all face. You don't have to be some expert to have an impact in technology.
Yeah, I love SS's answer. I think, telling people who don't have a tech background or understand more technical sides of the industry that they can't have an opinion is so ridiculous to me. And, really accentuates people's imposter syndrome, which in itself is not good at all, because then those people fear contributing their voice when it could be so vital. And I love this concept that you mentioned where these apps are being created where you order people like a menu. It's like the Uberization of society, where like we want something fast and we want what we want and we want it now. And in itself, that's inherently dangerous, because then how do you actually get to experience life how it's supposed to be experienced if you don't get to see like people's flaws and you don't get to accept people's flaws? Obviously I wouldn't consider something flawed, but you know what I mean. But and you don't get to know someone, like you're just taking away all of these experiences and trying to digitize them so that you can have things better, faster, stronger. And what kind of society are we actually trying to create in the end if we just want to Uberize everything?
Ooh, that's the president, y'all. That's the president of the Women of Sex Technology, okay? That's the vision that we are rocking with right now, okay? These are the leaders that you are seeing for the future of sex technology. And I'm serious, because this is very important. These are the people who are leading an industry that historically has not embodied these values. And here you're hearing right now from two women who are, the leaders of an organization who are trying to change the world. Every topic we talked about, we are trying to radically change it. And so thank you all for being here today and taking the time to be in this space with us and listen to us today, because this is very important. This was 2020 during one of the most difficult times in the world. And I guarantee you, with this mindset that both Allison and I share, we will change the way that we navigate technology, especially sex technology. So thank y'all.
Hell yes. Such a pleasure to have you here, guys.
Hell yes.
Oh, awesome. On this note, let's go to our next theme, which is focusing more on privacy and security. So by design, at a very fundamental mathematical level, the blockchain can make every interaction public. So why do so many entrepreneurs are selling blockchain technology as anonymous and private? Can blockchain deliver what we actually think in terms of privacy and security? And how anonymous is our sex history on the blockchain? Aliftan, let's start from you.
So I'm not an expert in blockchain security, but as I mentioned earlier, from a high level, I understand, how it works. And some of the different concepts with the different coins and how they do track you. And we all know that, once again, everything is hackable. So I think that the concept that it's totally anonymous, for me personally, I would say that's inaccurate, because we are all tracked. Everything that we do is tracked. We all keep a surveillance tool in our pocket, and that's our cell phone. It knows everything we do, who we talk to, and if it really wants to find out if we've been exchanging things, I'm sure that it can. So I think, as I mentioned with the Vice point earlier, this tracks all of your data. It may not track your identity, but it knows exactly what sites you're using its coin on, and what porn you're watching, and what you're clicking on. And then again, like when you have to transition this money from cryptocurrency to fiat currency, then your identity is revealed. So you would have to constantly be trading cryptocurrency. Like that's how you would have to make all your payments. And right now, our world isn't set up to be fully automated using cryptocurrency. And again, if we're going back to the fact that we want to decentralize something to take away power from like this huge authority that's constantly surveilling us, how is this helping marginalized people or vulnerable people? Like rural people out, like, and I come from a very rural background. I didn't have access to the internet. I didn't have a cell phone. Like, how would I be using cryptocurrency now if I still had lived where I grew up, I think, but sorry to go on a tangent, but going back to like what you mentioned, like anonymity of it, there is anonymity, but at the same time, it can also be exaggerated. Like everything is exaggerated in advertising in order for people to sell what they want to sell. And you can cherry pick things in order to make a point that may not actually exist. So I think it's important to keep in mind that there is disinformation out there. There's propaganda out there, and through our digital lives, we have the ability to have our behavior predicted, and we can be molded to think things are true when in reality they actually aren't true at all.
I think that we should always question any company that promises a concept, and please understand I mean concept of privacy and security without education. Because this means that they often want to sell you their version of what they believe privacy and security is without you actually being able to critically think about how to navigate privacy and security. And this is the problem. We have a huge lack of education around digital space and what that means for privacy and security. We as humans have lived in the physical world for so long. I know if a person's walking up to me in a certain manner. I know if someone's looking at me. I know these kind of human let's say signals, right, for that privacy is being impeded or my safety is being impeded, but we don't quite know that in digital space. And so there's an education gap, and I think that we are gung-ho with all of these people promising this thing in digital space. You cannot promise anything. You cannot promise, and I think that's the fear, is that they're kind of promising something that they actually, there's no way they know how to deliver. And also please understand that just like physical space, there will be things that are implemented now in digital space that we later find out is completely unethical, unreasonable, and actually completely detrimental to human health. Please understand that just because it came on the market right now today and they're saying it's better, everything takes time to navigate and understand, and that we are in a whole new brand new world with navigating digital space. And so we need to be mindful and we need to be patient with our understanding and have the impact on the human experience of things like blockchain promising privacy and security.
Another question coming from here. So you're a blockchain user, you're making transactions, you're also running some communication channels on the platform. So you're leading quite active life. So you're following this idea of anonymity. So your identity is hidden, but you leave all those data points around your track. So how do you think, what does it take and how easy is it to actually build up the profile of this very active blockchain user with his real identity, what it takes to reveal the person and connect virtual and physical identities.
Yeah, so I think about this a lot in regards to like the sex work community, right? So in my podcast, I navigate the conversation in my privacy and security episode, but also in my dating and digital space episode. So Allison's touched a little bit on kind of the difference between, the need for, I can never say this word, anonymousness. I cannot say that word, anonymity. Because it's important, right? So there's a difference between wanting to withhold your identity for just simply because you want to navigate the space freely, or holding your identity because you want to navigate the space fraudulently. Gosh, I can't speak today, y'all. But I will say that there's a difference between you wanting to navigate. Like, I think part of it is because we are so used to our data being used to police us. And we're so used to the data being used against us in such a violent way, as in shadow banning us or excluding us from certain spaces, etc., that it's so hard for us to even conceptualize a world where our public data is not used against us. And I think this is part of the reason why concepts like blockchain have been introduced, because there are people who are just so, oppressed, not only in physical space, but also digital space. They want to be anonymous to kind of let go of some of the stigmas that can be attached to their identity. Maybe, let's say you're a marginalized race, right? Like you're Black. Let's say, you're in a certain space and you want to be anonymous because you don't find yourself as attractive. We want to lose all of these, the real world things that hinder us. And I think that's part of the reason why blockchain was created. And so to publicly use it would mean a world that does not hurt us based off of things that we can't control. And I think that's a concept as of now that we have not approached. So it seems unimaginable, but I don't know if blockchain is the answer. I think education is the answer. I think education is always the answer, but that's how I feel about people using blockchain publicly in a sense. And I don't know if sex workers will ever want to use anything like that publicly. And is that a problem? I'm not sure.
Right now, I personally just don't feel that the average person understands how much data is collected on them on a daily basis, how much they're being tracked, and how much that data is used to make decisions about their life for them, whether it's applying for a job, applying for a mortgage, whether you're allowed to use social media. Like, just for example, about a year ago, I found out about digital archiving, where for deceased people, where there's this online database of photographs. Somebody went around and took photographs of all of these gravestones and the grave sites within cemeteries, and they have all of your loved ones' personal information and location and family tree available for public viewing for free for anybody on the internet. And seeing pictures of my family's gravestones felt so violating to me. And I know my family never consented to any of this. And I know that it's a little bit off topic, but at the same time, I feel like this just illustrates we just don't know what's out. We don't know what our consumer profile is. Our government doesn't, in the States at least, doesn't give us the opportunity to access or consent to having that data collected and deleted and stored, and we just don't know what's out there. So really, I think that anything is possible. If you have a great, amazing OSINT skills, to track someone down, yes, that's definitely possible. To have somebody under constant surveillance. So yeah, those are just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Excellent. Let's now imagine a world. So we're talking now about cybersex and a bit of virtual reality, where we are currently are. So let's imagine we are living in a world built on blockchain where all our sexual history, including flirty text, nudes, drunk messages, sexual acts, their duration, frequency, positions, and so on, number of orgasm partners, kinks, all recorded and stored permanently in the block. So in this world, you can't simply delete the shared history or pretend it never happened. What effect do you think living in such a traceable and open world will have on our intimate relationships?
Ooh, damn, that's a good question.
Do you want to go Sex first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll give you my civilian perspective and my sex worker perspective. So, what do I think the impact of our lives being completely digitally recorded will have on our human sexuality, right? I think, we're already making this assumption that in the future, our sexuality will take place predominantly in digital space. And I think that's pretty wild to think about, right? So we're already thinking that there will be a lot more navigation of it, therefore it will be tracked, right? And so you use a very specific word of like, you can't forget about it, or you can't pretend it didn't happen. And so in a weird way, it's making us face ourselves more than we ever have before in the world. Kid Cudi has a song and he says, "Ignorance is bliss," and I love that shit. And I think sometimes when we live in the physical world and we don't have a digital track, we can kind of forget certain details and express ourselves differently. But I will say that it will take a lot more digital literacy around data. And just like Allison said, we do not understand the concept of how many things are being tracked and then sold back to us, and decisions that are made for us in the back end and that we aren't even aware of because of the data we share. And that will not exclude our sexuality. And understand that when we say sex tech, we mean entertainment, we mean fun, we mean pleasurable, but I'm thinking about also, what about my fertility app? What about my health app, So I'm thinking about my interactions with my partners, which is very sensitive information and emotional information, but also my health is very emotional, right? And my reproductive health is very emotional for me to think about. So I think that we will have to have a lot more education about it and more transparency from these big tech platforms with what they're doing with their tech and why they are why they're collecting certain data. And I think this concept of give us your data in return for a free service is a fundamentally exploitative concept, but it's the way that tech has been introduced to us. So I'm interested to see how we can grow away from that and actually create an economy of how we engage in digital space, just like we do in physical space. And I also think that when we think about sex workers, we have to also think about who is monetizing their data based off this sex work. So I know girls, not girls, I know women who navigate camming or that somewhat are in VR that kind of use teledildonics, which is the Bluetooth technology that allows you to use a digital device, remotely, right, away from each other. So if I have a toy, I can use an app to make your toy vibrate, even if you're in London, for example. So how that data will be used, I'm very scared because people don't value sex workers how they should. And so I feel a lot of sex workers will lead this innovation around that space, around data collection in sex tech. And I hope that this technology can be used to better the human experience of sexuality rather than monetize it. And this is why we need more women in charge. And this is also why Women of Sex Tech needs funding. So if y'all know people who are funding non-for-profits, we want to do studies and things around these topics. And so we need more women in charge of research and implementing really healthy ways to use technology, which also involves data collection. So that's my info.
Yeah, I think, so first of all, Essex really hits home the point of something that's constantly said, that if you are getting something for free, then you in turn are the product because your data is being sold. And so my first thought when you asked this question personally was, if I were to have all of my data, my sexual data recorded, how would this be weaponized against me? And how would this be weaponized against people who are more vulnerable than I am? So, like, we see now already this type of data being weaponized when it comes to non-consensual pornography, or like also known as revenge porn. We see it being weaponized with sex workers who are trying to cross the border and having their social media, examined, and having those people who monitor the border saying you can't enter because they're making assumptions about who you are and what you do and the way that you behave, and all of these just really harmful biases are kind of being integrated into the tech that we already use today. So our data, our sexual data, if you look at it in that way, if you post a selfie or send a nude or whatever, it's already being weaponized. So we can only make the assumption that if we don't have everybody represented at the table creating this technology, the people who are creating our future and our sexual technological future for us are the people who have a seat at the table now. And those are the people who are the least marginalized, in my opinion, and really need to give up their space to the people who are being harmed at this very moment.
But if we go back to the question and actually just pretend that that's the actual reality, in terms of how do you think it would change our relationships with others if we were to live in that world? Like, do you think people would be more selective in terms of what they do, and they would repress some desires, or you think people might just like go with it and be more open and don't feel shame about it? What do you think would actually happen within the social relationships and within the intimate sphere of our life in that world?
I think it depends on where you come from.
Yeah.
Depends on your education.
Ahead,
Depends on what kind of sex education you receive. Because the way that you're going to make decisions and the way that you react to that data is just going to depend on, who you are in that moment. And so it just all stems back, like as Sex was saying, was the sex education. So like, maybe I would want my data shared with certain people, but maybe I wouldn't want it shared with other people. Because in certain relationships, like you have one option where it's either weaponized against you or it's not weaponized against you. So it's just like a 50-50 chance of you being harmed or not, and the reactions of the other people that you share that with.
Yeah, I want to give two examples that I personally have had with my friends, and someone else I know. So one example is a woman who I saw. She was fired from her mechanic job because she had an OnlyFans. Okay, that's a direct correlation between digital and physical space, of how her navigation of digital space directly impacted her physical space. I have another friend who joined let's just say a kind of mutually beneficial dating website, right, that you have to verify yourself to be on. When she's from London, when she tried to come to America, she was stopped at the border because they had her identification. Direct correlation between how she navigated digital space to how she navigated physical space, right? So what we see is, like I mentioned earlier, an echo chamber of the realities of physical space echoing back into digital space. We see the same things happening. We see the same policing. We see the same oppression. We see the same marginalized people being hurt over and over and over. We see queer, brown, Black people, right, being the targets of this abuse that is it, and people who are creating it are not the main people who are targets of abuse. So they do not design for it, and they do not account for it. Okay, and they almost don't care for it either. And so this is a fundamental problem when we're navigating this technology. And so I think it's important to acknowledge, this is real. This is really real. This is seriously real, how it impacts our physical space, our physical lives. And so in my podcast, Thought Leader Pod, I navigate that a lot, that parallel of how does physical space impact our digital space and vice versa.
So I guess one of the options that people perhaps do in these digital worlds where they want to try to maintain their anonymity, they may develop a second identity that would live in the virtual world. What do you think are long-term implications of living such a split life, and what psychological consequences can it bring? At what point do you think the virtual identity would overpower the real and become the actual identity of a being?
Oh my God. That is so good. Allison, do you want to go?
Sure. I think that, you know, there are several ways to look at this. The first one is our technology is becoming so advanced that even if you have a different identity online, unless your face is constantly obscured, like facial recognition technology can still help you find out who that person is. Like they have a search engine in Russia already where you can upload photos of people and find out what their identity is. And we see that now with Clearview AI, which obviously if it can welcome a lot of unwelcome solicitations. It can create a lot of harm. It can create a lot of assistance to people who are trying to stalk someone or surveil someone. And so in that sense, it brings me to like the next perspective, which is I don't really believe anymore that we have our digital lives and our physical lives. I think they are one thing now because we go to sleep with our phones, we wake up with our phones, and the way that our data is, harvested and trafficked and sold, and we're not paid for this labor of helping these companies monetize off of our data, and how that data is then in turn used to influence what we buy, what we watch, who we match with on dating apps, and literally everything that we do, all of our behavior is influenced by our digital lives into the physical world. I really don't think that there's a separation anymore. And we can even see this now, like I know not related to blockchain, but with the coronavirus, especially in the States, like we have people who think that this is a hoax because of disinformation that they are reading online as their digital selves. They are then going out and taking physical action and causing harm in the physical world because of what they participate in online. So I don't think that there's a separation anymore. And honestly, I'm sorry I went on a tangent. I forgot your original question, but that was my thought process on that.
Yeah, that answers it really well. SX, do you have anything to add?
I have a lot to say about this topic, okay? And I feel very passionate about this topic. And this is actually the main reason why I got involved in the concept of technology, right, at all. And why I'm into the idea of tech philosophy at all, because of this concept of split reality. So basically you asked, what do we think the long-term implications is of having an anonymous profile online, or just simply a different digital presence versus our physical presence, and what does that mean for like our connection, right? And what does that mean for the future of our humanity, pretty much, which is a really deep thing. And so I love to talk about this from a perspective of the sex work community, okay? A lot of sex workers constantly have to navigate dual reality. And not only a dual reality, but one of those realities being connected to something that is so highly stigmatized that it's criminalized and has violence connected to it, sex work. What does that mean when you are navigating to one thing that actually, funds your life? It gives you financial upward mobility. It gives you social upward mobility. It really is you. It's who you are. But you have to keep them separate for the fear of your actual life being impeded on. And so it's scary. I think, just like Allison said, there is no such thing as offline and online. I don't know if you all have heard of a tech philosopher. Her name is Alex Wolff. She talks about this concept of when people say, oh, you're offline now or you're online. No, we are constantly online. And just like Allison mentioned, because of COVID, we're made more aware of that than ever, that we are always online. We're always on Instagram now. We're always seeking this connection with people that we can't physically be around right now. And I think that it creates a lot more mental pressure on us. We have more mental pressure on us right now than generations before have ever had. period, point blank. I often, in the beginning, I spoke to millennials a lot, right? Because I'm 24 years old. Millennials right now are age, I think, like 36 to 24. And so I'm like the last millennial. But I really do I navigate the world as a millennial. I'm really not Gen Z. Meaning that I remember when we didn't have tech. And my parents never had tech, my grandparents didn't have tech. But now they do. And so now we have this ever-ending presence of upward mobility. And when I say upward mobility, I also mean socially, financially, and socially. So, and we see it now too with the pressure of COVID. Oh, go sell something online, go do this online. We are presented now that not only am I supposed to know how to socially navigate physical space, I now have to know how to navigate digital space. You know, I have to literally know how to do two different completely worlds. I have to know how to do both and do them very well, or else it's a problem, right? So, you know, so now I have to be able to create this persona online that is presentable to people, but also navigate some tricky subjects. And so I think we do not know the long-term implications of what this is going to mean on society. But thankfully, like I mentioned earlier, you know, you have people like Allison and I who are at the forefront of trying to make it better for humans to navigate digital space. I think it can basically I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but basically it can blow up some of the issues that we already have in our life, as far as like bipolar, depression, these kind of mental health issues. I think digital space will simply just make it even more. And so we have to be mindful and be even more careful now in the future. And I'm afraid that we're not acknowledging it to the level that we should. And so that's my opinion, but I do think that split reality can be very scary. And digital space allows for splitting your life so easily that I fear for the younger generation. I really do.
So let's move to the next question, which is about intimate data. So why do you guys think the privacy is so important for us as the species in general?
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's just because it can be weaponized and is weaponized against you. And I think the more explicit it gets, the more harmful that it becomes. And that's my answer. It's just like that's why it needs to be protected. We have tons of propaganda out there now, even at the government level, that just even just conflates consensual sex work with sex trafficking, and that in itself is harmful. So that the data itself is then weaponized to create anti-sex work politics that are killing sex workers. And so I think as a whole, this data, until as a society we can gain comprehensive sex education and have I guess just like unbiased thoughts about people who participate in the sex economy or sexually active or whatever, like there's nothing we can really do about it. It has to remain private until the people out there don't want to hurt other people with this data.
Do you know this like good old saying, like the less we hide, the less we fear? What if we all just change the way people relate to intimate data and would start apply this principle to our sex lives? Do you think that world is possible? Do you think we can accept complete sexual transparency on a global scale without hurting each other?
No, I don't, because there are so many communities where sexual data, intimate data is used against people now. And I mean, we look at things like the incel community, or like just even people who trade revenge porn pictures as like in a gamified way, just because, they want to harm people. I think that if we were on the path towards becoming more progressive in that sense, we wouldn't need to, one, have these discussions, or two, have people creating communities like Women of Sex Tech or like the Sex Workers Outreach Project or any of these other communities that are trying to destigmatize and put up barriers to protect people to begin with. So in my vision of the future, I I don't see that happening, because right now all I see is technology exacerbating the harms that are already existing.
First of all, let's define privacy, okay? Privacy is the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people, okay? Oof, big, that's huge. And I fundamentally believe that privacy is not a privilege, it is a right. A lot of people don't know this, but I have incarcerated family members, including my mother. Most of my life, my mother was incarcerated. So this means that she had no right, her human right, when you go to prison or you go to jail, her human right for privacy was taken away because she violated certain social rules, right? Okay, stay with me. So when we have incarcerated people, right, they don't have privacy. So think about it that way. Think about like being in jail or incarcerated. Then you have no privacy. But you as a civilian and as a person have a right to privacy. It is not a privilege. It is not something you should have to ask for or beg for lack of better words. So when we talk about the right to privacy, data is also included in that. But we as humans cannot conceptualize that quite yet because it is such a new concept that has just been introduced to our world. It's true. And I say that because I'm a millennial, so I wasn't introduced into like technology until I was like maybe 11, right? Maybe 9, 10, 11. And not even like some real like smartphone technology, probably until I was in high school, right? 14 years old, 15 years old. Versus now, everyone, from the moment there's babies taking selfies, for fuck's sake. There's babies on TikTok, okay? With TikTok prompts, okay? So we have to acknowledge the impact, right, of the state of being free from public attention. That's not even, the one thing I see when I go on Twitter and all these things is the rapid sharing, the viral concept of digital space, right? That if you put something in public, if you put something on Twitter and it goes viral like a meme, you actually you don't have the state of being free from public attention. It's not a right anymore. It's taken away from us. So I think that we as humans, going back to this philosophy, we as humans really have to fundamentally think of what we think the function of technology in our lives and what it means to us and the value that it holds. And that's something that we should be asking ourselves constantly about anything we engage in. But unfortunately, it's not common culture to apply that thinking to digital space because we do not value it. Or we just, I don't know, there's just a lag. I think we just need more time to be able to understand.
I guess on this note, we can move to our next theme, which is a conclusive part. So what do you guys think is the future of sex, blockchain technology, and security?
The future of blockchain and sex tech, I think I'm sure that there are definitely valid use cases, but at this time, in terms of tech equity and digital literacy, these are reoccurring themes that we see that are gatekeeping access from these types of technologies from being adopted by mass amounts of people. Right now, my view of blockchain is that it's more of a sport. I'm sure there are one-off like anecdotal cases where it's definitely used, but like I just only hear of people trading, like Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever and mining, and it's more of a sport in my eyes. We see all of these failed apps that we've discussed today, and I just have to ask myself, like, are they failing, one, because they aren't an inclusive company and they're excluding the people that they're trying to help? Or are they failing because the reason behind why they're being created is actually harming more people than it's helping? Or is it also because there's not enough people who have incentive to adopt this stuff? But it's also about access too. Like, how many people don't have access to the internet? How many people don't have access to resources to learn how to use these things? So in the future of sex and blockchain, I think there will be valid use cases. But right now, I think there are more concerning things with a higher priority that unless blockchain can help solve some of those socially impactful use cases, then I don't really see a use for it at this exact moment.
Yeah, so what do I think is the future of sex tech, blockchain, and security? My answer for all of these things is always give women money, fund women, okay? When we think about the orgasm gap, when we think about all of these, oh, well, why don't we, confidence, orgasm gap, user experience, diversity, empathy, all these things being implemented and designed into the future of sex technology, and also anonymity and privacy and security, I think it's giving women money. Because when women have money, they're better able to make choices for themselves, and they're better able to make choices that ultimately benefit them. And technology is not excluded in this. And so my ultimate goal is to uplift women identifying people and their experiences and their navigation of technology. And I think by giving them money to create what they feel should be created in the world is going to be the absolute future. And guess what? We haven't seen that. So that truly is the future. We haven't seen it. I'm ready for it. I mean, we've seen it on a small scale, but I'm ready to see a future feminist sex tech world.
Excellent. And lastly, what do you wish that people knew about sex tech industry and blockchain before they would start developing solutions for it and make these solutions ethical and inclusive?
I wish people knew exactly what SX just said. That everybody needs to have a seat at the table. If your technology is going to be impacting a certain demographic of people, then they need to be at the table too. They need to be a part of the design process. They need to be a part of the development, security, everything. They need to be there every step of the way. Representation is so critical. And if your app is supposed to solve a problem, then you need everybody involved to make sure that there is no way that it can be abused to go back and harm the people you're trying to help.
Yeah, I think what the future of blockchain and sex tech looks like is exactly radically including sex workers in the conversation. Right now, around COVID-19, we are seeing so many people attempting to navigate digital space for community, for connection, for intimacy, and we know for a fact that if you design around the most marginalized people, you protect everyone. If you design technology around the most at-risk people, you protect everyone, okay? So that includes sex workers. How do a sex worker be on your team? Because I guarantee you they have some kick-ass, innovative, rockstar ideas about how to communicate and feel connection and feel intimacy in digital space. I guarantee you they do. And they know how to do it. And that's my answer for that. The future is active and radical inclusion.
Excellent.
Amazing.
So I think on this note, we can open the mic to the crowd. So guys, I'm going to enable the raise the hand function.
I'll say one more thing.
Sure.
Before we go to Q&A, part of this experience is funding women. So again, my Cash App is SXBRAT. If you loved anything I've said today, go ahead, DM me on Instagram, get that information, and send me some dollars. Okay.
Excellent. Guys, so now I have enabled raise the hand feature on your right panel. So if you press that button, I'm gonna see everybody in a queue for questions. All right, we have a first question. Isaac?
I'm curious about how you would see technology actually being part of intimate situations. Like, most of the time it feels so unnatural to fiddle with a phone or be at a computer, or perhaps in the future people will be much more intimate in VR. Like, how do you see those things work together?
So I think that there's a huge, thank you for your question. I think there's a huge, this morning I attended an online webinar for a place called Echoes Club. If you're a person of color, they have these amazing webinars almost every day. And it was about grief. And it was about grief around COVID-19 and how we are having this grief we don't even know we're experiencing yet. And the biggest point I took home was the power of acknowledgement. Oftentimes when people are creating technology now, they try to create this online, offline world. And so we talked about this a little earlier, right? About how there really isn't any online or offline. And so when you're navigating tech, understand that now the way we navigate tech is it's all encompassing. So when we can acknowledge that, for example, going into virtual reality space actually benefits my day-to-day, and this is how it benefits it, and I'm acknowledging that and I'm embracing that, that is a different emotional connection to tech than what we had before versus, oh my God, you're spending all that time in VR. Ooh, something must be wrong with you. You can't handle the real world, right? So it's kind of this perception and acknowledgement that is going to control our emotional impact of being able to handle both physical space and digital space.
Okay.
Does it answer the question, Isaac?
To some degree, but it leaves it quite abstract. Like, I mean, there's a whole discussion of dialogue and consent and an ongoing conversation, and all this potentially being mediated through technology. And the use of like most tech gadgets today, it creates a huge distraction. Like, I don't know, couldn't really imagine fiddling with a phone and having sex. Perhaps let's say a smart watch or something, but how do you actually imagine this working as a user experience, as a human experience?
It's my point, acknowledging what you need from your sexual life. If I know for a fact that I need this integration of technology into my life, I'm acknowledging it, and not only am I acknowledging it, I'm planning for it and allowing it to be in my life. That's how it happens. And so that can be a mental hurdle and mental jump for certain people. But the idea of approaching it from saying, oh my God, it's so taboo, how is it even possible, versus saying, how can I make it possible are two different perspectives. And so when we talk about the concept of tech philosophy, I was watching a documentary, and his name was, who's the really famous black guy, Cornell, the famous black guy who is at Harvard who teaches philosophy. I think it's Cornell West. Ooh, please, I hope that's right. He was talking about how even the concept of understanding that reality can be different from what we see is a radical concept. And so when we think about navigating technology for our sexuality and how that impacts our life, that's already a radical concept that we have to allow and make space for, and make space for it to benefit us, and make space for us to enjoy ourselves in that.
Okay, thank you.
I think my only comment would be to just, I hope that folks can recognize that sex tech isn't only about pleasure, but it's such a huge spectrum that has really positive and progressive areas of innovation, but also dark areas as well. And so, and that sex tech exists not only as sex tech, but it exists in the fields of ed tech and fintech and all of these, other areas where we typically wouldn't think that has sex involved in it. So I just hope that, when we ask questions around sex tech, that we realize that it's not only pleasure that's being centered.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that. That's very important information. Great. So next question. Also, guys, if you have a question directly for Alison or for SX, just say that in the beginning. Or if it's a question for everybody, then of course we'll make sure everybody answers them. Thank you, Isaac, for your question. Going back to Jelly.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I'm so glad it's two women doing it. I really want to learn how, I guess, sex and blockchain could be used or translated to the real world. I found that recently a lot of my friends are dealing with #MeToo scenarios on WhatsApp. actually. And I'm kind of worried because there is no HR on WhatsApp. There is no protection for anybody online. And one of the things that I'm doing in virtual reality is I bring virtual reality into prisons. So a lot of it is looking into rehabilitation, but GDPR comes in, so protecting the data of the people who use it. And one of the things that we're looking at is neuroscience and the triggers that prisoners might be affected by if we put them into a different environment, for example. So yeah, I was really hoping to get your personal advice to see how you think data that's being taken from very specific parts of the body, not just your physical stuff, but also the what's inside the brain, how you see the future of like actual thought data being protected in virtual environments.
Just to make sure that I understand what you're asking, are you saying how can we protect the intellectual property of people, incarcerated people who are using VR? Is that the question?
It's not just for, well, I guess my work works across lots of things, but a lot of it actually looks into biometric data. And so I want to ethically make sure, like, for example, I'm working on a VR film that uses integrated eye tracking. So we can actually track if you're scared, if you're happy, if you're sad, and the environment will change according to just your eyes. So I wanted to learn from this event to see, if you're looking at something that's so sensitive, like what you're actually thinking, like your subconscious, how you see, for example, the sex industry translate that into like real storytelling and enterprise applications and things that really have to do with like mental health and well-being. So, if someone's depressed or things like that, those are the things we're looking at.
Yeah. Eye tracking is something that makes me very scared and paranoid, to be honest. It's not something that I can speak to as an expert. I can only speak to it personally. But I think, if we just look at how casually the data that we currently have is being used right now to being used against us at this moment, I think it's safe to kind of make the assumption that if you have even more intimate data, not necessarily sexually intimate, but just like in terms of eye tracking and stuff, how you're able to predict or just understand like if somebody's sexual identity, for example. And I think like I'm just always afraid of how things are going to be weaponized. So like, I know you mentioned you used it for people who are incarcerated. Like that just makes me think about the book Weapons of Mass Destruction, which is a really awesome book that illustrates how algorithms are weaponized against vulnerable populations. And so I can only think like in terms of like this type of data on top of the weaponized algorithms, how it would be used to further weaponize vulnerable people. I'm sorry if that doesn't answer your question, but that's just that's the extent of the answer that I can give.
Jilly, does it answer your question? Do you have any following questions on that?
I think the conclusion is just that there is no data protection for online, what you give away. And I guess like one of my things that I'm really scared of is like people using VR to simulate like rape and violence, and how to make sure that consent is involved there. That's my biggest concern.
Great, thank you so much. And now we're going back. We have one more question to Isaac. Isaac, you're on mic.
So we spoke a lot of like privacy and discreteness, and also of accountability, like some technology actually being built to avoid accountability and so on. And like there seems to be an inherent conflict. Let's say some services, they try to associate individual people by computer vision and so on. There seems to be an inherent conflict between privacy and individual accountability. So how do you see this possibly being settled?
Ooh.
Question.
That's a great question. And so I'd love to dive in first if that's okay. So I love to navigate this concept in digital space, right? The concept between just, navigating your anonymity, again, that word, versus your accountability. So one of the things that I planned into the app that I was creating, Deep Thoughts, was, okay, so you would have to be verified by a third-party site, and that site would give you a token, and that token lets you access our website with a username, but we don't quite know your actual identity. But if something were to happen, right, like let's say you were to assault someone or something were to happen, we could then find out your identity through this coin that we hold. And so that idea would be accountability. A lot of these sites lack accountability for their users. And honestly, not only do the websites lack accountability, but and this is me speaking toward the US, our police system actually doesn't really know how to account for digital abuse. We aren't really there yet. Our law enforcement and those people actually don't have the tools that they need to determine if someone is a real threat or harm in real life. So that's also a problem too. So it's a dual-ended thing. It's actually us not understanding how to hold people accountable in physical space for things they've done in digital space, and also us not having an education of how to ethically and empathetically navigate digital space. So it's like a two-sided thing. And I think that the abuse that happens in physical space can replicate itself in digital space. And so this idea of accountability is really, really, really interesting. And how do we design for accountability? And it's almost like, how do we design for consent? Consent and accountability go hand in hand. And so I really hope that you are a technologist and that you're creating cool stuff, and that's why you're asking the question, because it's a really, really good question. And I hope with my platform to navigate it a lot more regarding privacy and security. That's
awesome,
it.
thank you.
That was a great one. Cool. Thank you. So the next question we have from Lingerie.
Thank you very much for all the presentations for the event. My question is, do you take part in any kind of research studies, or maybe you do your own? If you are allowed to, could you please tell us a little bit about it?
No, I don't. But I'm really hoping to. I mean, I mentioned, I'm the expert of my own lived experience, and I really do channel a lot of my community, my friends, and the people around me. I'm around a lot of sex workers, and so they are literally professional people who navigate sex, right? So it's pretty fun. But I will say that this year I have been appointed the vice president of the Women of Sex Technology as we navigate being an organization that's now a non-for-profit. So the goal for the future of Women of Sex Technology is to get funding to be able to facilitate some studies and researches that we feel is needed for the industry. And I think that'll look way, way different than things that already exist. And so if you are someone who's interested in that, please get in touch with Women of Sex Tech, because we are very much looking for people who want to change the world.
Yeah. So Sex Tech Space, the publication I originally mentioned, kind of started as just like not only a personal research project, but also to amplify the lived experiences of people directly rather than from a third party, and to act as kind of this education platform to help people understand what this industry is actually about. So in some sense, I see that as it's research in itself. Personally, just through academia, I've been able to do research on policy and compliance, which is why I speak a lot on SESTA FOSTA and the Communications Decency Act, and how laws affect technology. But I think that it's interesting to point out, though, in my experience doing that research from an academia background, is that I was met with a lot of discrimination and a lot of just kind of shame from not only my professors, but also my classmates. And I remember presenting some research I had on CAM models and security, and how different policies affect the privacy and security of CAM models, and my professor interrupting me to ask, what a cam girl is, and to make sure everybody knew what that was. And then my classmates kind of dogpiling on me, saying that they're not up to date on their porn vocabulary, and just like things that made me feel very small and as if I wasn't allowed to take up space. So I think that it's kind of also critical to know that when we are pursuing stigmatized fields in academia, in spaces that are primarily dominated by men and white men, that their biases are really woven into the structures of how we're educated. And I saw that in my own experience, and then at that moment was when I realized how I was kind of being groomed to be a cog in the wheel of how the government participates in security, rather than how we need people to participate in security. So like SX mentioned, we really hope to be able to raise the funding this year in order to conduct that research around the critical areas of sex tech, in order to help progress it and expand it, and do what's right and equitable. But because we don't have those resources at this moment, I definitely suggest looking at Bryony Cole's futureofsex.org. I know that she has a team that puts out some research around what is happening. I also think Carrie Goldberg, she runs a digital sexual abuse law firm. Her book, Nobody's Victim, is a great place to start learning about the darker side of sex tech when it comes to sextortions, exploitation, and revenge porn. There's a lot of statistics in there that talk about all of these policies, as well as how Pornhub got started, and the abuse of Grindr, and so there's lots of little nooks where you can find research, but there's not one place yet that it's all allocated, as far as I know. So until that time comes, connecting with people on Twitter and just finding out who's focusing on what very niche fields can help you kind of find what you're looking for.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
I would like to add a little bit from our side about doing research. We actually, alongside these talks, we started a project last autumn, which is called Sensory Seduction. It's our ongoing artistic research into the ideas of multisensory sexual experiences in virtual reality. But yeah, because of Corona, we couldn't really do the second part yet. But based on the pilot, we wrote a paper, which actually I sent the revision literally yesterday because it was a deadline, and I got so slammed with everything. I was like, okay, I need to make sure it gets there. So fingers crossed, if it gets published, we will be sending out the copies to download. But yeah, this is just a little bit of self-promotion. Right, I guess that's it from the questions. So I'm going to share with you guys information about our next event of this series, which is going to be in June. So at the moment, most likely it's going to be virtual reality again, because it's really not certain what's happening with the lockdown. So this event is going to focus on the sexual wellness in extended reality. So we're going to look into how our sexuality, physical or mental, is affecting our behavior and our relationships with ourselves and others. We're going to explore how multisensory technologies and extended reality can enhance our sexual well-being. And we're going to look into how psychologists and therapists are using this technology with their patients and what they're doing to improve our sexual wellness. So there's a lot to come on this subject, and we'll be posting updates into more precise themes very soon. So yeah, stay tuned. And if you like what we do, please support us on Patreon. We recently launched Patreon, where we post a lot of exclusive content, what we do behind the scenes. So I'm hosting weekly update videos where I just immerse you guys in every single part of what we do, because we also do some experiments with soft robotic on the side. So there is a lot that's happening behind the scenes. So please join if you still haven't. And thank you so much for staying with us to the end, despite all technical issues we had at the beginning. But how else without it? We are pioneers of this field. Like, this is completely brand new thing to us. Like, all three of us never done this before. We never had a virtual panel on sex tech. I don't think it ever even existed. So well done to all of us to making it happen. And thank you guys for staying with us.